Gilbert. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I'd like to add my congratulations to those who dreamed up this idea, those who have helped it come into being, those who've supported it, and all of you who are here this morning. I think it's a splendid initiative, and I thoroughly welcome it. My only regret, if I can say so at the outset, is although I'm here for this session, I'm afraid I won't be here throughout the conference, but I promise you I will get a full report on it a little later. Money. Money, according to the old saying, is the root of all evil. Now, that belief has had a very good run, but frankly it's wrong. I mean, first, to be pedantic, the accurate quote is, love of money is the root of all evil, which, as you'll see immediately, is rather a different thing. A better truth is that money is the root of all progress. Without it, the poor stay poor, the sick stay untreated, the hungry unfed, and the homeless stay homeless. And in crisis situations, such as the current horror we're seeing unfold in the Philippines, life itself is threatened. Without money, there's no care, no research, no hope, not much future. So money matters. It matters, and it can be a great force for good and not evil. In our global world at the moment, albeit richer than we've ever been at any time in history, hundreds of millions of people are in dire need, and literally billions in lesser need. There are many, many worthy causes seeking help. But governments, even the richest, can't remotely begin to meet the demands that exist. Even in the United States, the wealthiest nation that the world has ever seen, need far outstrips the taxpayer's capacity to pay for it. And that really illustrates, without any further preamble, the need for philanthropy, both corporate and individual. Good causes come in all guises: to help people, to facilitate research, to fund the arts or sport, to protect great monuments or important buildings, well, the list is endless. In every country, almost every human endeavour seeks more funding than it has, and in many cases would collapse without that funding. So despite its growth, the spread of philanthropy is still patchy. It's grown steadily through the years, with some outstanding beacons along the way, the Cadburys, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, being early and generous examples of great philanthropists. But even as philanthropy grows, so does the need for it. And one iron rule should never be forgotten. Philanthropy depends upon economic success. Many of the most generous bequests by individuals are made after a successful business is sold, or shares in a business, and the vendor is cash rich. So underpinning all generosity is the capacity to be generous, and that usually requires a business-friendly environment. Now, in the beginning, philanthropy was really a grand name for pure charity, and yet it can differ from charity in many ways. Philanthropy tends to be strategic giving rather than responding to an obvious and immediate need. Nowadays, it embraces microfinance, social businesses, environmental concerns, and much else. And the scope today of philanthropy will be a huge shock to dear old Captain Coram. Captain Coram was the sea captain who set up the Foundling Hospital specifically to help orphans in London in the 18th century and set a trend for many generous-hearted individuals to follow. But individuals apart, we must also look to corporate philanthropy to increase its role. Since companies make profits, and they make them for shareholders, a question immediately arises. Why should they give them away? And it is, of course, a very good question. And yet there is a better answer. But let me give you an answer, not from me, but from a businessman, the chairman of a large corporate group in the Philippines, who was a substantial philanthropist. And this is what he said: "We all pay for poverty and unemployment and illiteracy. If a large percentage of society falls in the disadvantaged class, investors will find it hard to source skilled and alert workers. Manufacturers will have a limited market for their products. Criminality will scare away foreign investments, and internal migrants to limited areas of opportunity will strain basic services and lead to urban blight. Under these conditions, no country can move forward economically and sustain development. It therefore makes business sense for corporations to complement the efforts of government in contributing to social development." It is a classic answer for the need for corporate philanthropy. And it points up a truth. Actually, it points up two truths: that philanthropy can benefit the giver as well as the recipient, and that we must look for philanthropy where there is money, which is why, up until now, the most generous gifts of all have come from the United States. In recent years, they range from the extraordinary Buffett-Gates partnership, in which Warren Buffett gave $31 billion to the Gates Foundation. Many generous bequests: $9 billion from Chuck Feeney to Atlantic Philanthropies, $100 million from Mark Zuckerberg for public schools. It's a very long list. And in a global world in which extraordinary fortunes are being made by particular strata of business and society, it is a list that is growing. So, how do we encourage it to grow further? I think we need first to understand what motivates philanthropy. And I think there are many reasons for it. Personal choices or passions, perhaps influenced by past experience. A desire to make a difference, perhaps. A wish to leave a legacy so that the giver is remembered. Sometimes it may simply be to legitimize great wealth. The belief that having gained it, it should be productively used. And occasionally, and I hope this isn't too cynical, it may simply be to earn the recognition that follows great generosity. In every one of these cases, tax incentives may help and may magnify the gift, but I don't believe that tax policy is fundamental to the underlying decision to give. What's the best way to encourage giving and repeat giving? I think the best way is to make sure the money is wisely used. Because it's a gift, it mustn't be wasted. It needs to be focused, to be productive, to be transparent, and to be an effective use of that money. If that money is wasted, it's hardly likely the philanthropist will give again to that cause. If it's used wisely, the chance of repeat generosity becomes much greater. Good intentions underpin philanthropy, but only good outcomes will ensure it grows. And one way of achieving that, often overlooked, yet it's really very simple and very straightforward, namely the desirability of mergers of non-government organisations and charities so that philanthropy is targeted to best effect and isn't competing with itself and wasting the inevitable on-cost that exists with almost every activity that is undertaken. And that leads me directly to what I suppose we might call better giving. There's no certainty that philanthropists will have the very best idea of where to help, or the very best technique in giving. The ability to make money does not automatically confer the judgment to spend it wisely. Philanthropy is a spreading phenomenon, but it's still in its relative infancy, with too little general guidance about its merits and its pitfalls. So this is an area that needs a lot of work to ensure value for generosity, and conferences like this will help build up a locus of experience upon which people can draw. Now, at present, we lack a philanthropic society with a wide reach, or academic courses on philanthropy, or on giving in any sense, or indeed any overarching advice. It's a deficiency that must one day be put right. And then I suppose the next question is, what is the aim of philanthropy? And there's no simple answer to this. In many cases, it will be filling in gaps left by state provision. In others, it will be taking risks and innovating microfinance, for example. It may be addressing ideas that would never, ever be a priority for governments. Governments have things they can't avoid: education, health, welfare, social services. That may eat up all their resources, and they may have no resources for other things that are very desirable, indeed necessary, to make society and the quality of life a little better than it was. So philanthropy can take many forms. Gifts to religious bodies or education is a different form of giving than gifts to arts or sport. In truth, the beneficiary of philanthropic generosity could be almost anything, and no one should try and prescribe it. Generally, philanthropists are conservative with a small c, and cautious in their giving. But let me focus just for a moment on risky giving. Risk-taking might involve research with no certainty of an outcome. But what a gift if you could find a cure for Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or a particular form of cancer. But it's risky. It may not deliver a result. And then, of course, financing projects is risky. One of my daytime jobs is chairing the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust, which is a trust that has raised money to provide a legacy for Her Majesty's 60 years on the throne. And what we are seeking to do with the money we have raised is to end avoidable blindness right across the Commonwealth. That too is risky. We may not achieve all of it, though I happen to think that we will. Well, it's risky, perhaps, to try and end certain diseases, as the Gates Foundation have remarkably pledged themselves to do. So in many cases, the risk-taking can be a partnership with seed corn money leveraging further contributions. All options are open. Philanthropy is much bigger and wider than simply handing over a stash of cash for people to utilize in some fashion that already exists. It may be a wholly new proposition. Let me add a word about the relationship between donors and governments. You heard the welcome that Gilbert gave on behalf of the government of Gibraltar. And I think governments generally welcome philanthropy. They're not embarrassed that somebody is helping meet a need in their country. They realize that need must be met, and they're keen to welcome people who will meet it. So that nexus between government and philanthropist is an important one, but sometimes can be a tricky one. Philanthropy mustn't just be a substitute for government cuts in tough economic times. That is not the purpose of philanthropy. It's much more than that. And it's important that givers preserve their independence. But donors and governments can work in partnership. They can have common goals, and ideally should have a good relationship. And governments can help, not least with incentives and the lightest possible regulation, and sometimes helping to define the problem that the philanthropist seeks to solve. Now, in making these scattergun observations, I'm aware there is, as yet, no proper framework to the culture of giving. We'd like a culture that regards giving as normal and natural, legitimate and worthwhile. We'd like it to engage the young as early as possible, and for the habit of giving to embrace the merely well-off as well as the super-rich. Because Gates and Buffett give so much money, doesn't mean that other people cannot make a significant contribution with a much lower gift. And it's very important, and I think good for society and the individual, to encourage that as a central tenet of philanthropy. And we'd also like the culture to spread worldwide, which frankly it hasn't yet done. It's much more developed in North America and in the UK than it is in Europe, and much more so in Europe than in the developing world. There is huge scope for improvement in different parts of the world. And all of you who've travelled will know that in some countries, extreme wealth exists alongside extreme poverty, just a few streets away. You can come out of some eastern countries, out of the most glamorous hotel in the world, and find people begging outside the hotel who live in abject poverty just a street or two away. So there's huge scope to spread the idea of philanthropy to every culture in every part of the world. Now, how do we do that? Well, we encourage attitudes and practices. We hold up exemplars to entice new givers who can see the difference that they can make. So let me, as I move to a conclusion, to try and identify a few objectives that might be said to be best practice. Firstly, to encourage a more philanthropic culture by publicising good role models and publishing the results of good practice. Let people see what can be achieved with the judicious use of money. And then, of course, to promote more information, education, if you like, for potential givers, so they realise what the options are, what they can do, how they can make a difference themselves. And then to look to see how we can promote partnerships to leverage generosity and eliminate wasteful duplication. Every penny wasted is a penny not spent upon a good cause. Every penny duplicated is a penny not spent on a good cause. And then we need to expand the pool of people who will give, individual givers and corporate givers, and encourage small or medium giving as well as the very large endowments. And I think also we need to look to establish forums for philosophy, forums that will enable a philosophic commitment to philanthropy to become endemic, institutes or conferences around the world like this one, where people can share ideas and experiences and perhaps unite to meet objectives. So the people who organise this conference are in their own way trailblazers. And they haven't done it just once. They have committed themselves at the outset. They have committed themselves to give this conference a chance and make it an annual event. And I warmly commend them for doing so. Now, those few suggestions are merely a dipstick sample of options that might help to build on what has already been achieved. Two final thoughts on philanthropy. Firstly, the problems the world faces are huge, and they are growing, while the capacity of governments to meet them is diminishing. Harnessing the best of human nature to meet the worst of problems is immensely worthwhile and is something in which we can all play a part. And secondly, I believe philanthropy to be one of the highest examples of a civilized society. People give of their own for the benefit of others. The beneficiary may never know his or her benefactor, and vice versa, but a need is met, a want is satisfied, and an advance is made. The Good Samaritan lives yet, and we should honour that and be grateful for it. Thank you very much. Questions?
microphone that will be provided for anybody who may want to ask John a question. So,
let me offer you an enticement. You can ask a question any way you like, and I will answer it any way I wish. Over here.
So John, you talked about some of the cultural differences when it comes to attitudes in relation to philanthropy, and you started to explore how those cultural differences might be affected. I think we're very conscious of these huge differences nationally when it comes to philanthropy. Have you some further thoughts on how, in fact, one can quantum leap on that issue? Because some of the huge wealth being created in emerging economies doesn't seem to find expression in philanthropic endeavors, and it seems an enormous assignment that needs to be addressed. Any further thoughts on that?
Actually, I think the answer is quite simple, really. I think it's example. I mean, people see what other people have done and they follow it. We are creatures of habit. Whatever society we come from, whatever religion and background we may have, we are, in our own way, creatures of habit. And if people see the example of philanthropy, I think they will follow it. So that is actually, I'm sorry to return to this conference, why I think conferences like this one are so valuable, because they're taking to every part of the world the experience of what is happening elsewhere. And there will be very rich men sitting in, or women, sitting in some of these audiences thinking, I have enormous resources that I can't possibly spend. My family are well provided for. Why did I never think of doing this? And they are shown what is being achieved as a result of that philanthropy. Now suppose for a moment, to take an issue very dear to my heart, the one I mentioned earlier, suppose we are right in our Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust and we do end avoidable blindness right across the Commonwealth. Imagine the person with cataracts or river blindness in Nigeria or in some remote part of India. We can give them back their sight for how much do you think? On average, $25 to $30. Imagine being unable to see for 30 years when $30 would give you back sight. Imagine also, suddenly, if you are blind, in a society of that sort, sometimes you are outcast. You have no means of earning a living. You are nothing but a burden on the kindness of your own family, who may themselves have very little. Now, I have been present on one or two occasions when someone who has been blind for a very long time, with the sort of problem that in Gibraltar you'd pop along to the doctor, you'd have a treatment, and you'd have your sight back very speedily. But they have been blind for years. And you see them, and the bandages are removed from their eyes. And for the first time in many, many years, they can see. Now that is a wonderful moment, except the first thing they see is me, which is a bit of a downer. Bit of a downer. But it is remarkable. We do need to touch people's hearts by example and by illustration. And that is what will encourage other people. I don't think it's particularly difficult. You can't bully people into giving their money away. You have to touch their better instincts. And almost everybody, I will make a few exceptions, almost everybody has those better instincts. You just have to reach for them and touch for them. And find often the family experience that will encourage this particular giver to give to something that they have had direct experience of. Which is why, of course, so much money is given to cancer research, for example, because all around the world people have seen the misery that is caused by that particular ailment. So I don't think the answer to your question is very difficult. It's example, and carrying that example everywhere. And that can only be done by conference after conference after conference, example after example after example. So we know what to do, and you're doing it. Yes, there's one just here. In my experience, questions flow much more easily after coffee.
Good morning, Sir John. Thank you very much for the talk. I was very interested with what you were saying about people who are slightly younger, you know, my generation, millennial, if you will, coming into the workforce and only earning a small amount relatively, especially compared to the Gateses and the Buffetts of this world. The advice you have for my generation and how to give best with slightly more limited resources, and how best to influence others who at this stage of their lives haven't yet got the pure financial resources to make that difference. So any thoughts you had on that?
Several, really. I mean, some traditions, as a matter of habit, give, if they possibly can, 10% of their income. Now, I'm not suggesting people, where it's extremely difficult these days for young people, they are living in a world where wages are not soaring, costs probably are. They've got their own children, their own families to care for. It isn't easy to look beyond that for most people, individually, but collectively they can. I will not take you as an example. Let us take a mythical X. A mythical X has very little he can give, and he thinks, well, the £10 a month that I could give is really of no difference. I won't bother with that £10 a month because it's a drop in the ocean. But if he has 10 friends who are going to do the same thing, or 9 friends, let us say, to make the mathematics easy, you have £100 a month and not 10. So I think in the early days, it's worthwhile banding together. And it's also quite desirable to choose an objective. If you can see what you are getting, just dropping your money into a charity is very good. But if you've actually got something you can see that is happening, I think you get a closer connection with it, and you're more likely to be generous. So I think it's very good to encourage that, even at the most modest level, because who knows whether someone who is extremely modestly endowed with cash today may be very lavishly endowed with it at a later stage in life. So I think the habit is a good one. And I hope it's not too esoteric to say that it is actually good for society and for the individual if they do that. Too often these days people find their life cocooned in their own particular circle. But beyond that, wholly different circles in wholly different areas of need. And I think if you can widen that as greatly as possible, these small pools of giving will begin to do that. So I think that is the only way in which you can approach it. Of course, the other way, which is much better, is for you to become extremely rich. And then you can give a very great deal to good causes. So I commend, march out from this conference this afternoon and go and make yourself barrel loads of money, and then give away a lot of it.
We have another question?
Perhaps, John, I could also mention that volunteering, I mean, if you don't have the money, in fact, the most valuable asset that doctors have is time.
Yes, well done. I should have mentioned that. You're quite right. Carry on. Can I offer you the podium?
I'm taking it when you've gone there.
Well, Michael, thank you very much. That's entirely right, of course, and I should have, in particular in answer to that last question. It isn't only cash, it's effort, and what you can actually do for people. That's extremely valuable. It's extremely valuable. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, I think...
Any more, or are we done?
Any more? Take advantage of the presence of John before...
I'm not sure whether that's a hand raising or a head being scratched. It's a head being scratched.
Well, I would like to, I think if there are no further questions, I think just to thanks to John once again. It's been sort of a great experience for all of us to be, here with yourself, and we thank you yet again, and I think we'll allow you to a very sort of busy schedule that you have for the rest of the morning before.
Thank you, Trina. Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a very successful morning, and I shall hand over to wiser men than I, who will touch on all sorts of other subjects. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.